Welcome to Career Pathways. My name is Don Bowers and I'll be your host for this short video. This video is really part one of a video series called Conquering the Pi, installing Kali Linux on the Raspberry Pi 3 and of course configuring it and all kinds of cool stuff. And this again is going to be primarily for penetration testers, and so if you're not a penetration tester and you don't love Kali Linux, then that's fine. There's other videos out there on the Raspberry Pi, but this is going to be Raspberry Pi specifically for penetration testers. Well, your first question might be, what is a Raspberry Pi? Well, Raspberry Pi looks just like this. This is the Raspberry Pi 3. Now, this video series can be used with a Raspberry Pi 2 or 3. One of the main differences being a Raspberry Pi 2 does not have built-in Bluetooth, which at this point we're not going to utilize, nor does it have built-in Wi-Fi, which we are going to utilize. Now, the nice thing about the Raspberry Pi 2 and 3 is there are 4 USB ports. You can see 2 on the top on the right, on the left of your, or right of your screen, excuse me, on the right of your screen, and there's actually, these are stacked 2 by 2. So you could find your, your latest USB wireless dongle, plug it into one of the USB ports along with a keyboard and mouse, and still have an extra USB port for other things. This also has an HDMI port. It has a power port. It uses the same basic power settings as most of your Android devices. It's 5 volt, 1 amp will run this Raspberry Pi. On the back side of this, and what you don't see, is a small slot for an SD card. Now, it depends on which one of these you're using, whether it's a Pi 2 or a Pi 3. The Pi 2's SD card slot is spring-loaded. The Pi 3 is not. The only reason I mention that is I have an older Pi 2 case that I'm very fond of, and I'm using it on my Raspberry Pi 3, and it makes getting the SD card out a little tricky. I have to use a small knife to kind of get it out because my fingernail won't fit in through this to the slot. However, if you're using a Raspberry Pi 3 case, they've allowed you to have a little more room in getting access to the SD card. I want to mention that because it can be a problem. And I'll tell you right now, if that's the only problem, we're in pretty good shape. This bad boy supports a gigabyte of memory. It supports wireless built on the board. One of the problems with the wireless on this particular thing, especially for penetration testers, is the wireless does not go into monitoring mode, so we can't run aircrack NG and those kinds of things. However, it does go into the mode whereby we can use it for a wireless access point, which we're going to do in video part 2. So we'll talk about that when we get over that video. But it's a great device. Again, a gigabyte of memory. It has a quad-core ARM processor. It uses an SD card for its hard drive for storage. It supports HDMI, which the way we're going to run this actually does present a couple of problems, and in the second video I'll show you how to overcome those problems as well. So what our goal is to take this Raspberry Pi, install a copy of Kali Linux on it, and then check this out. We're going to make this thing so it can be run in a headless manner, which means when you get it out in the field, you won't need to plug in a keyboard or a mouse or a monitor. And in fact, we're going to make this thing so it not only does it put up a wireless access point so you can access it with your wireless device, be it a tablet or a small laptop, we're also going to set it up so it will email you its new IP address. So every time you plug this into a new network, it's going to get a brand new IP address. The problem is if you don't have a monitor, keyboard, mouse, you don't know what IP address it's using. Well, we're going to take care of that. We're going to actually have it access one of my Gmail accounts and send me its internal and external IP address. What do I mean by that? Well, the internal IP address might be on the 10 net, might be on the 192.168 net, might be on 172.16, or whatever IP the network is using, and it will send me also the IP address of whatever it's accessing externally on the internet. Well, that's really important. That way I have the penetration testing vector of their outside IP address, and I can get that right from the Pi sent to me via email. It's really cool. So we'll be able to access this thing wirelessly. We'll be able to have it send me its IP address, where we can also hook up an extra wireless adapter so we can actually go ahead and begin to look at wireless traffic on their network. Those types of things will all be included in this video set. So I'm going to show you guys how to bring this up in what they call headless mode. Part of the problem with headless mode, part of the other problem with headless mode is that when you bring it up in headless mode, it does not sense an HDMI connection, and so it's going to go, one of the devices you can get to go along with this Raspberry Pi is a really small, 5-inch monitor or 7-inch monitor that fits over the Pi. And this Pi is about the size of a credit card, and I actually was kind of thinking before the video, I wonder how big the Pi really is, and I've been using these for years. But I never actually pulled out my credit card to look, and guess what? It's about the size of my credit card, maybe within an eighth of an inch of not covering up the whole credit card. It's really small. So this is a great device. The cost anywhere between $35 and $50 depending on how many accessories you want with them. But they're really a great little device, and we're going to set this up so we can run it in a full headless mode. So even though there's no HDMI attached to it, it will come up in nice big mode that we can see it and actually manage it and manipulate it. So we're going to do all of that. We're going to do, well, starting off with, there'll be a part 1, 2, 3, and 4, and there may be other parts ensuing after those, but initially we're going to do part 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're going to set up certain software on here. I'm going to go ahead and set up Tor browser on here so you can use this to browse in the Tor network and browse anonymously, because if you're a penetration tester, those are things you might want to do. We'll install a copy of LibreOffice, so if you need to do any documentation right there on the Pi as you're using it to penetration test, you can actually do that. But we're going to set up a lot of really cool things on this Raspberry Pi. Well, the first thing we need to do is talk about what we're going to need for this whole series. And you're going to need several applications. You're going to need a copy of Putty or any other terminal program that you might want. Putty is just my favorite. It's very flexible. It's a free download. I'll take you over to nightknight.com when we start the videos, and we'll download a couple of these applications. I've already got them installed on my system, but I'll show you where they're at. We're going to need a copy of 7-Zip, which is a free unzip program, because when you download this from Kali Linux, what you're going to have is you're going to have a file that is in an XZ format, and most extractors won't see that, but 7-Zip will. We want another program called WinImager. WinImager can be found at sourceforge.net. It's a free program as well. This will allow us to take the Kali image that we download and extract and put it over to the USB device. You're going to need an SD card reader, because that's how we're going to write the image to the device. Those are, $5 to $9. They're not very much money, so you're going to want to buy one of those. We're going to also need a Linux live CD of really any type. What I'm actually going to use for this particular part of the process is I'm going to use a copy of Kali running on a copy of VMware, because we need to actually extend this partition once we get the image over to the CD. We'll talk more about that in a moment. We're going to need a Kali image for the ARM processor. We want a program called WinSCP. This is a really great tool, and if you're going to be trying to push files over to your Raspberry Pi, this is a great program. Basically, it comes up and asks you the IP address of the Pi, the password, username, in our case will be root and Tor, and then it actually makes the connection between your PC and the Pi, and then you can copy files over to it. The other way you could do it is you could put your information on a thumb drive. I like to use FAT32 when I do that, and then I can just plug it into the Pi. But sometimes you might want to load software on the Pi remotely. For example, if you're actually in the middle of a penetration test, you might want to put files onto the Pi or get files from the Pi, and you might have the Pi somewhere else, and in the location it might not be right there in front of you, so you might want to use this WinSCP. And then of course you need a Raspberry Pi 2 or 3. I recommend, you could have an 8 gig SD card. I've gone as high as 64. That's what I'm currently using on both of my Raspberry Pis. Kind of the middle ground is the 32 gig, and you can get a 32 gig online for about $11. You can go down to Best Buy and get one for about $19. So it just kind of depends whether you want it now or you want to wait or you buy it with your kit. But no matter which one you decide to do, we are going to need to expand that. So if you buy the 8 gig, you're probably fine because this, when it installs, I think is about 6 to 7 gig on the SD card. But if you have a 16 gig, you're going to want that extra space. If you have a 32 or 64 gig, I guarantee you want that extra space. So we will actually use the copy of Kali Linux to expand that using gparted. So what is the process then for getting this image? The first thing we're going to do is we'll download the image from kali.org. And probably before I do that, I'll take you over to 99.com and show you some of those applications where you can actually get them. I've got them all loaded on my PC, of course, already, but you can get and download those from 99.com. 99.com is an excellent website to go to. It's a resource that every pen tester should know about. And it's basically software that's out there on the internet. It's free software, but they take all of the bloatware out of it, all of the, asking if you want to, install Google Toolbar and Google Chrome and all that stuff. It'll just install the app you ask, and it's very, very clean. We're going to grab the image from Kali. We're going to uncompress the image using 7-zip. And I already have the image downloaded from Kali, but I'll show you how to uncompress that with 7-zip. We're going to transfer the image to the SD card reader and the SD card using our WinImage program. We're going to resize the image with another copy of, in my case, Kali Linux running on a virtual machine using gparted. And then we'll boot the Pi and we're going to complete the initial login. When the Pi comes up, it's actually going to want to ask a couple of questions. So you are going to need at some point a monitor, keyboard, and mouse hooked into your Raspberry Pi. For this initial login, folks, is the only time we're actually going to need a live monitor hooked up to this thing. This is very cool. So we'll be able to remote into this shortly after the first couple of videos. We'll have full control over it using any one of our VNC, Tight VNC, Tiger VNC, VNC Viewer, Ultra VNC, whichever flavor you want to use. They'll all work with this thing because we're going to install a package called the X11 VNC Viewer. One of the other things we're going to do in this, it's not on your list here, is once we do our initial login, we're going to go ahead and set the Raspberry Pi to automatically log in. And this is important, folks. This is a penetration testing tool. So I'm going to be honest, I'm not near as concerned about security. I don't know, gee, what's the worst that can happen? Is they find the Pi and they put it in the trash can or smash it with a hammer. I'm only out $35, and if they're paying me 10 grand to do a pen test, what's $35 device, number one. So what happens if they hack it? Well, there's not much there. It's going to have your hacking tools on it, maybe a couple of copious notes or whatever, but that's probably all. So in order to get many of the applications to run automatically, I want it to automatically log in. Now, the thing I know is once you do an upgrade and an update to this particular device, it actually breaks. It breaks the automatic login. I'm going to show you how to fix that. So we're going to take this stuff step by step. It's going to actually encompass more than just on this list. I think there's 5 or 6 or so steps to the first video. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started configuring our Raspberry Pi. So to get started, let me go ahead and take you over to 99.com just to show you kind of some of the stuff that I like to see in this particular website, and it really is very cool. Here, of course, is pentestprime.com. In case you're wondering, this is what the website looks like, and there's probably going to be some Raspberry Pi tutorials right under here underneath labs. In fact, here's already some Raspberry Pi stuff I have here, and we'll find some more labs, including the ones you're viewing now. So I'm going to go over to ninite.com. That's ninite.com. And here is a list of applications that can actually be downloaded from ninite.com. And this is very cool. So for example, if I was wanting to get my applications, I'm just going to go down here, down the list and look on both sides. I haven't seen anything yet I want. There is Putty, so I would click on Putty right here. I would probably click on that and go ahead and install that. As I go up the middle, nothing there I see, nothing there under Skype. I'm also going to want the Win. Um, that's not the right one. Let me get down to where I need to get here. 7-zip. I would click on that. And then up here at the top, I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. There's antivirus, and then utilities. I'm probably going to want the. Um, I'm not seeing anything else here. So I've got Putty, I've got 7-zip, and I think I've got the Win SCP. I thought I saw that somewhere on here. Let's verify that it's not here. Pretty sure I saw that somewhere. These are the applications you can install. You can install them all at the same time. All you do is click on the download link. I'll show you that in a moment. Up there it is right there. I knew I saw it. WinSCP right there. Missed that one when I came through the first time. So there's our 4 apps that we need to install. All I need to do is tell it to get your Ninite. It's going to download a small applet to your PC. And it's going to offer to run that app, and the answer is yes, it's okay to run it. When you run that app, you will in fact install all of those applications. Now, I already have them installed on my PC, so I'm not going to do that again because they're already installed and configured. And really, there's not much to configuring. So the next thing we need to do is go out to kali.org. And download the software that we need to use on our Raspberry Pi. And so we're going to want the download Kali Linux right here. And when we get to this download page, you can see there are a lot of distros here. Now I've downloaded this one very recently. This is the one for 64-bit. This is 2006.2. Kali Linux just came out with a brand new distribution paradigm. Rather than being Kali 2.0, 2.01, 2.02, they're now using the near year.2. This is also called the rolling version of Kali. It's a little bit more updated. One of the things about Kali, I just want to make a kind of a shameless plug about Kali Linux. It has there's a bunch of other software out there that can do the same types of things that Kali does. There's one called Parrot, several other distributions. I think Kali has the most mature update and upgrade repositories out there. They support a lot of apps right out of the box. If I had to run a copy of Linux on my desktop, it would not be Ubuntu, it would not be Arch Linux. All those are great platforms. It would no doubt be a copy of Kali Linux because a lot of stuff just comes already installed, and I absolutely love it. Now, this version of Kali here runs GNOME for the interface. The Raspberry Pi, I'm going to say it's probably not strong enough to run GNOME. It might be, but what we're going to run is XFCE version 4, which is a lightweight desktop built specifically for these smaller devices like the Raspberry Pi. So to get to those, I've got to go down to the bottom. And I'm going to click Kali ARM Images. And then when this comes up, there are in fact several images and several devices. And really, guys, all you need to do is go pick your device. So here's one type of device. Here's, for example, Chromebooks, and there's several of those, HP, Samsung, and Acer Chromebooks. Here is another one that's popular. Here's yet another one. And then we get to the Raspberry Pi Foundation. And by the way, I need to mention, and I did not, the whole reason for the Raspberry Pi project was actually developed over in the UK. They were trying to put out a PC, very small platform, very small footprint, that can be used by people that, maybe schools, institutions that can't afford full-blown computers, and they wanted to get kids, K through 12, into programming. Well, man, at $35 a device, this is really economically feasible. Guys, I know one college, and I'm sure there's more than one, who actually is using Raspberry Pis as one of their main platforms because they need to have a machine where they can do whatever they want to do, do with it rather than have to worry about the IT staff coming in and configuring administrator rights and fighting with their IT staff. They just run Raspberry Pis. Very cool devices, and you can even stack these together and put them in a cluster. So you could have 4, 8, 12, 16 Raspberry Pis actually running as one device. So this is a very cool device. Now you can see here I've got 3 images. I've got the Raspberry Pi for 2 and 3. It's the same image. If I click this, it's going to indeed want to download the image, and you can see it's here. Now, I'm going to tell you I've already downloaded the image because this will take a while, and I'm not going to sit here and spin the video. This is 2.1.2. This is a very recent release. There is also one for the Raspberry Pi. This is a little a lighter weight version. And this is really more for the Raspberry Pi 1, and then here's another image. This is the one I want. I want the one for the Raspberry Pi 2/3. So if you are downloading this for the first time, go ahead and click on the Save button and download it. I'm going to cancel because I've already downloaded it. So I already have my Raspberry Pi image downloaded, and in fact, here it is. And because I've already installed PKZip, then I can simply open this file because it already associates this image file with the Raspberry Pi image. And there it is. And really, folks, all I need to do is tell this thing to extract. So I'm going to go ahead and click extract. And it wants to know if I want to extract it where it's at. And the answer is I do. It's going to go ahead and I'll tell it OK. And here it comes extracting the image. Now, when we download this, this is what, 116 meg. When it extracts out, it's actually going to be quite a bit larger than that. It's going to be, I think, somewhere around 5.6 gig, pretty close to 6 gigabytes. So it is a little bit bigger than what you downloaded. That's because there's a lot of compression happening here on this image. This is going to download this image, and it's actually going to look kind of like a CD-ROM type image. It's going to look, well, and in fact, looks very much like an ISO. It's still an image, but it's an ISO style or type image. It's not actually an ISO, but it's an image that our imaging software can actually understand. And you can see I'm actually downloading this and waiting for it to go ahead and download. I've already got a copy over here, by the way. You should know it's right here. Here's the one that's actually downloading. They're the same. It's the same image. In fact, we can take a look at this if you'd like and go to properties and see how big this is. And then we can verify, of course, that it's indeed the same size. This is 6.83 gig. And as this comes up to finishing, completing, it's going to be hopefully the same exact byte count. Unless they've upgraded the image since the last time I was on here, which they may do without changing the number. They could, in fact, update the image without my knowledge. And you know what? It's odd. They don't even call me and ask me anymore. How about that? Okay, so this is almost done. And I'll wait for this to finish. We will be pausing the video as we start this next step because it does take a few minutes to actually copy this to the SD card. And so when we do that, I will pause the video and then we'll continue after. And so if you're doing this along with me, you might want to pause the video while you extract and put this on your SD card. So this is almost done. There it is. I can go ahead and close this window. And I can go over here and I can right click and go to properties. And again, that is 6.83 meg. So, or gig. So that is exactly the same file. I'm going to go ahead and delete this one just because I already have it over here. And in fact, I actually called my image Raspberry Pi 3 instead of 2. And here it is right here. So I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to take the SD card. I'm actually physically putting it into my my SD writer. I'm going to go over to my PC, and I know that I already have data on here. It's going to be overwritten, but what you want to do is you want to take a note of the drive letter. In my case, it's going to be drive G. This is the drive letter I want. This is a 60, well, it's not a 60, it's actually a well, I got to think, is this a 32 gig or a 64 gig? It doesn't really matter. Here it says 60 meg because that's kind of, there's a small partition on here, and that's fine. It doesn't matter whether it's a 32 gig or a 64 gig or a 16 gig. you're going to write your data here. So I know that's drive G. I know that's the correct device. Now I'm going to go over to another folder that I have already on my system, and I believe it's called Hacking Devices. So let me go find that, just because that's where I keep things of this nature. And I'm going to go look underneath Raspberry Pi, and here is the WinImage program. This is a standalone application. It doesn't even need to be installed. You can get this from www.sourceforge.net. I'm going to simply click on the program, and here it is. It's going to ask for admin privileges. I'm going to go ahead and close this because I really don't need this open. And here it is. So the first thing I want to do is I want to verify that it indeed does say drive G, and it does. That's important because you don't want to write this file to the wrong device. And folks, I've actually done that. So that's why I went over to my this PC and looked to make sure the right device had the right drive letter. So I'm going to click on the folder, and I'm going to go to my desktop, and I'm going to find the Kali right here, the 2.1.2, and in your case, if you just download this, it's probably going to say Raspberry Pi 2 image. Mine says Raspberry Pi 3 because I renamed it. I didn't want to mess around with overwriting the one I already had. I'm going to go ahead and tell it to open, and then you have really a couple of options. Of course, cancel. Then if you move your mouse over here, it says it's going to write the data from the device to the image file. Well, that's not really what we want. We want to actually, read. We want to write the image from the file to the device. And I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And it says, okay, now look, you're going to overwrite all the stuff on the device. That's just fine. I don't have a problem with that. So now I'm actually writing all of the device information over to the Raspberry Pi. Now I'm going to go ahead and do this, and I'm going to come back when this is done. This will take 15 minutes or so, maybe 10 minutes, because it's not a fully extracted image yet, but it does take a few minutes to actually copy this over. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and I'm going to come back after this is copied, and then we will proceed from there. So as you can see, I've almost finished loading this image onto my SD card. And just as we're loading this image on the SD card, once you get your Raspberry Pi fully configured and you've got it just the way you like it, can I just recommend you take the SD card out of your Raspberry Pi, plug it back into your SD card reader, and use this option right here for reading the image from the device back to a file. This is commonly known as a backup. You will be glad you did, because if for some reason your Raspberry Pi crashes, you won't have to go back and do all this work again. I keep several images available for my Pi, probably like 15 or 20. I mean, I've got a bunch. Okay, so this is done. Now, the next thing we want to do is this image is now on the SD card. My SD card, I forget whether it's a 32 gig or a 64 gig. Regardless, it probably only takes up about 7 gig of the actual SD card, and I want to expand it so it can use the full card. Now, I could go ahead and do this entire demo on what space it's already allocated, but I would be remiss in my duties if I did not show you how to actually expand this. And you have two options. Well, three. You could use something like Partition Magic and do it with that. I don't happen to have a copy of that. You can use a Windows or a Linux Live CD of pretty much any flavor, because most copies of Linux support gparted, which is what we're going to use. That's what I'm going to use. And in my case, I'm going to actually use a copy of Kali that I already have installed on VMware. So I'm going to leave this in my USB port. I'm going to go over here to VMware. I'm going to bring VMware up, and I'm going to indeed load a copy of Kali, and I already have that up and running. Here it is, my Kali rolling, and I'm going to go ahead and bring that up. And as I do that, I have the image already basically, I just did a, not even a shutdown, but a suspend. so that way the image would come up that much quicker. Here is indeed my copy of Kali Linux running in VMware. And I'm going to right click on the tab, and I'm going to just make sure that my removable device, which is this guy right here, is actually mounted. So I'm going to mount that, and you should see over here in the left hand part of my screen, this is both the full image and the boot partition, that little 60 megabyte partition. That's both of them. I'm now ready to expand this partition, so I'm going to go ahead and go into a program called Gwake. You can use a part of the terminal program that comes with this. I prefer Gwake because it's very cool, and in fact I will show you how to install Gwake on your copy of the Raspberry Pi, right? Okay, so here it is. I'm going to type in gparted, and it's going to run. I'm going to press F1 to get out of there, and this is the partition that my current machine is running on. This would not be good to repartition this. In fact, you couldn't. But I'm going to go over here, and I should see the SD card right here, and I'm going to go ahead and choose that, and there it is. So you can see that I have a partition here that is unallocated. All right, and so this is a 32 gig SD card. And I'm going to go ahead and right click on this and tell it to unmount this so I can resize it. So I'm going to unmount this part of the partition. I'm going to right click on it again, and I'm going to go ahead and tell it to resize. And check this out. Now I can take and use the entire CD except for that 6 megabytes that's the boot partition, and we'll actually mount that a little bit later for another process, but I'm going to expand that all the way out. I've tried this with 64 gig SDs. It works great. Let me go ahead and tell it to resize. Once I tell it to resize, I also need to click an apply button right here. So I'm going to go ahead and apply the change, and this will take a minute to go ahead and resize. And it asks, am I sure? The answer is yes, apply it. And it's going to come back here and do this. Now, it should happen pretty quickly. I had a 128 gig SD card, and the SD card was not a class 10 device, which this really does need to be. It needs to be an SD card as a class 10, and A was really slow, and B, it died. So it could be the fact that this won't do 128 gig. I don't know anybody who's done one yet. It could be the fact that I had just an SD card that was not compatible with the Raspberry Pi. When you get your SD card for the Raspberry Pi, it does need to be a class 10 device, and you should see that right on the packaging. So this is done. How cool is that? Now, when I boot into this Pi, you can see now I'm going to use the entire partition. So you can see I've got a bunch of space left, right? That's what you want to see. Now, I'm going to go ahead and kill this copy of Kali. I'm really not going to kill it. I'm just going to suspend it because I use it quite often. And I'm going to take my, forget the beeping and stuff. I'm going to take my disk out now. There it goes. And I'm going to take the CD, the SD card. I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to go over and I'm going to insert this into my Raspberry Pi. I'm going to power the Raspberry Pi on, and I'm going to boot from the Raspberry Pi. Now, the only thing that I need to do off screen that I can't show you is I'm going to log in. I'm going to log in with the password or the username of root and the password of Tor, which is root in reverse. So root, R-O-O-T, and then Tor, T-O-O-R. When I do that, the Raspberry Pi is going to come up and greet me, and it's going to ask me if I want to use the default config or if I want to use a different one. The answer is going to be the default. I'm going to click on the default button. The other thing I'm going to need to do is get the IP address of my Raspberry Pi, because I need to remote into that. I can show you everything else from this terminal, but what I can't do is show you the Pi until we get it to where I can actually auto log in and run XVNC in video number 2. So I can't show you anything directly on the Pi except through Putty. So you've got to bear with me. So again, take this SD card, plug it into your Raspberry Pi, boot your Raspberry Pi, which should be hooked to a SD or an HDMI monitor, and have a keyboard and mouse hooked to it. Plug this in, boot it, When it comes up to ask you for login, type in root and then Tor, and then click the little box that's going to come up to ask you what config you want to use. You want to use the default config. Go to your terminal then, and your terminal will be at the bottom of your screen. You'll see what looks like a terminal. Type ifconfig and write down the IP address that is for ETH0. Make sure you write that IP down. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and I'll come right back when I have completed that particular process. Now the first thing I'm going to do is go over to Putty and open up Putty, and you can see my Putty configuration screen. And you can see I have an IP address, and I actually went and checked again. My IP address actually is 119. So it's going to be 10.1.0.119. And I'm going to go ahead and tell it to open. And it's going to come up with a warning, really just an information about the fact that I've not logged into Putty with this particular machine before. So it wants me to verify that yes, I want to use certificates or SSH and that I have authorization to actually log into Putty, which I've just done. Move that over a little bit, and I'll go ahead and log in as root and Tor. And now you can see I have indeed logged in to Putty. Now I'd like to just pause the video for a moment and resize a few things just so we can see this a little better. So I'll be back here in just a moment as I resize the screen. So as you can see, what I've done now is just bring my terminal window into focus. And the things we're going to do with the Pi in the rest of this video and a majority of the next is going to be actually in this terminal window. So I want to make sure it was easy to see, easy to read, that kind of thing. Now I'm going to be cutting and pasting some information I have over here in a text file, and I am going to make that text file available on www.pentestprime.com, and I'll talk about that as I close, make some closing remarks at the end of this section of the video. So I have my Raspberry Pi. The next thing I need to do is I actually want to do an upgrade and an update. So let me go ahead and do apt get update. I'll try that again. And it's going to actually go out and look at the repositories. It's going to figure out what applications and items it needs to update. And then I'm going to go ahead and type an upgrade command, and that will take considerably longer. Now, I've done this before with this particular copy of Kali, and the second process, while this one doesn't take very long, the second process can actually take an hour or two. It's actually pretty long because there's a lot of things it needs to go out and grab. And it really depends on when you run this. So I'm doing this video in mid-September, and well, really early September, and my class is probably not going to be doing this until January. So there either might be a newer version of Kali out there, which will be fine. We'll load that in class when we need to, or it just may be a couple months between the time this video is made and you actually run your update and upgrade. It will just take some time. It will upgrade the full copy of Kali for you, but it may take time. So you just need to be patient with this particular process. So it's almost finished, and as soon as it finishes, it's going to give me back a command prompt. And there it is. So I'm going to go ahead and do a clear screen. So I'll type in clear, and I'm going to use my up arrow key twice, and instead of update, I'm going to type in upgrade. And I'm going to type in upgrade, so apt-get upgrade -y. Now what the -y is going to do is it's going to answer a default yes when that indeed is the default answer. So rather than try to hit yes for every application it wants to install or upgrade or update, it's just now going to default at that. Now as this process happens, I've actually already run this about a week or so ago on this particular version of Kali. When this runs, you're probably going to get, it's going to go through 100% of the update or the upgrade. And after the 100%, it's going to actually want to install and configure several, 3, 4, 5 different applications. And you're going to get a text window. It's going to have like a blue background and text. And it's a little bit difficult to read in Putty. So let me just tell you, the answer is answer the default or OK every chance you get. Don't make any changes. The default answers in this process are exactly what we want. So even though you may not see this here, and I will indeed pause the video because I don't want to wait forever, although you can see that I'm already quite a ways into this because, again, I just performed this last week or so. And I got those very windows I just told you about, those responses, those applications that need a response. I simply answer default on everything. Okay, so when you get that, please don't be shocked. You are going to get questions about different applications. You'll get a question about, are you going to use English? And the answer is yes. Default keyboard, maybe yes. Maybe, some questions about SQL. Just whatever they are, just answer the defaults, and you'll be a lot happier. And again, it's about a 2-hour process, so it does take a while to do. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video right now, simply because this, again, is still even going to take me a little bit of time, probably, maybe 10 minutes. And I don't want to just run the video for 10 minutes. So let me go ahead and pause the video, and when this finishes, I'll come back and we'll continue on with this particular process. So as you can see, the update has indeed finished. And again, if you are asked any questions via a text-based interface about things like keyboard and so forth, whatever the questions, just answer default and you will be good to go. Trust me, I've done this like a bazillion times. Now, one of the other next things I want to do is I want the Raspberry Pi to automatically log in. This is a penetration testing tool, and there are a variety of reasons why I want this device to log in. For example, as we move through this direction, one of the things we want it to do is automatically email us its IP address. Well, in order to do those kinds of processes, we actually have to be logged in and auto-starting some of the stuff and running them every time we log in. And if we have an auto login, they'll just automatically happen. So I need to set the auto login. Now, one of the things I've looked at as I've done the research on the Raspberry Pi is, and this isn't true for all copies of Kali, but it is true for the ARM version with the XFCE4 interface, is if I were to set the 4 lines in the auto login file that I'm going to set, and those would work after I do the upgrade, they get broken. And I had to do quite a bit of research to figure out, okay, they're broken. Now what do I do about the fact that they're broken? So I went ahead and I could have done the auto login service before I did the upgrade and the update, but I knew they would break anyway, so I chose to do it afterwards. So we're just going to do a couple more things to the Pi, and then I'm going to do kind of a wrap up. But I want to show you how to get this thing to automatically log in, because that is kind of important. So as I'm looking here from my terminal, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to modify a file, and that file is going to be found in Etsy. So let's just do an ls, and you see I'm in my root. So I'm going to do a cd ... Now, I am the root user, so I have a folder called root, and you can see it there. You see the folder called root. That is for the root user. When I talk about the root of the system, I'm talking about where I'm at right now, which is, and we'll look at this more when we get to File Manager and the GUI. It will just make a little more sense to you, but we are at the very root of this system. The root of the system is not the same thing as the root user, okay? So I'm at the root of the system. I'm going to type in cd etc, or Etsy as we call it, and I'm going to type in cd light dm. Light dm is where the XFCE, or at least where part of the interface is managed, and it's where we want to look at the auto login sequence. So I'm going to do an ls again, and you can see I have a file called lightdm.conf. That stands for configuration file. So I'm going to go ahead and type in nano lightdm.conf, and I think I misspelled that. I did. Try it again. I knew that because I was pressing the tab key and nothing was happening. So And I always do the tab key to make sure it's the right file, and there it is. Now, I use Nano when I use Putty, and there's a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons I like to use Putty in this particular scenario, until we get this actually booting up with the GUI interface, auto logging in, and the interface actually resized, which we'll do in the next video, sometimes it's easier to use Putty. So you'll find me using Putty sometimes, because I can cut and paste from my desktop so easy with Putty. And if I'm using one of the Tight VNC or Ultra VNC or Tiger VNC, cutting and pasting is not as easy. And if I can just access this Pi directly through Putty, cutting and pasting becomes very easy. I'm going to press the down arrow key about 4 times. And you'll see down here about 2/3 of the way down the screen, you see where it has bracket, seat, colon, asterisk. I'm going to go one line below that and press the return key a couple times, maybe 3 times, because I want to paste some information in here. Now, you're going to see me actually pasting a lot of information in the next couple videos. And I have all of that stored on pentestprime.com, all of the cut and paste items that I'm going to show you in these set of videos, in these 4 videos. I actually have them on pentestprime.com. And in the last section, I'm going to show you exactly where to go get those. So you will have these. Okay, so I'm going to simply now take part of really just 4 lines of code. I'm going to copy it from a text document, and I'm going to paste it right here. And to paste it, all I need to do is put the cursor right here, and then right-click my mouse, and it's going to drop it right in there. How cool is that? That just makes it so easy to cut and paste in from Putty, and I can even take up the slack there. So these are the 4 commands you need. Now, it's still broken. If we had not done the upgrade and the update, this would work, but it won't, because we've got to make one more change. Now, in order to save this document, I'm going to go ahead and press the Alt-O key, or I'm sorry, about Control-O, and then hit Enter. It asks me what file I want to write, and I want to go ahead and write this file. And then I'm going to do a Control-X as well. So now my file has been saved, and there we go. Now my file has been saved. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to go back a directory. So I'm going to do cd ... And the directory I want to get now is called PAMD. So cd PAM .d. This is another directory underneath Etsy, and you can see there's some files there. Now the file I want to get is called lightdm-autologin. So I'm going to again go into Nano. There are a couple of other editors here we could use. One's called VI. Man, I'll tell you, I like Nano way better than VI. So if I'm where I need to use a text editor and I just want it text-based, not graphic-based, because there really aren't any graphic-based editors yet, we'll install one called gedit. I'm going to use Nano. It's just easy for me to use. So get used to using Nano. So Nano, L-I-G-H-T DM-auto. And if I press my tab key, I should get the filling out that of auto login. And I'm going to press enter. Now, I want to be very careful here. What I want to do is I want to put a remark statement at line 11. Now, I know exactly where that's at, but I'm just going to go ahead and count them. So I'm on line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And this is the line I want to actually put a, oops, my mistake. I do that all the time. Don't you hate it when that happens? I'm going to have to try it again. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and do a £, and what that does, it's going to remark this line out. This line here is actually what breaks this thing. And so if I take that line out, now that line's not going to be executed. I want to leave line 12 in. Okay? So I've done that. I'm going to go ahead and do a Control-O, hit enter, and do a Control-X. And then I'm going to simply reboot the Pi. And when I do that, of course, I'm going to lose my connection. And you're going to see part of that screen right there. I'm going to turn around now and look at my Raspberry Pi, which is actually across the room. And I'm going to make sure that it indeed not only reboots, but that it auto logs in. And we're going to see that happen pretty quickly. And in fact, when it auto logs in, because of one of the parameter set in the last file I modified, there was a timeout equals 0. Some people put the timeout equal to like 5. And what that does, it gives you 5 seconds to change users. This is a penetration testing tool. Folks, I'm not changing users. I want to be in here as root. So I put that login or that timeout as 0, which means it doesn't even give me the ability to even look at the box. So my Raspberry Pi actually just logged in and auto logged in. I had to touch a thing, and I now have the interface. Now, I can't log into that graphic interface yet. There's some things I still need to do, and I will in fact do those in the next video. But I do want to do one more thing before I do a few closing items. I'm going to right click on my border right here, and I'm simply going to tell this to restart the session. And what that's going to do, since I disconnected, it's going to reconnect. I don't need to go over and re-enter the IP address because that hasn't changed or anything like that. So now I can just type in root and Tor, and you can see I'm back on my Raspberry Pi. How cool is that? And there's my ifconfig with an IP address, as we talked about earlier, of on ETH0 of 10.1.0.119. So this indeed is the same machine. I kind of like to check because I have several Raspberry Pis running around here, and you got to make sure you've got the right one. I want to do one last thing. Well, really two, but they're related. I want to install the RSA keys instead of the standard SSH keys that come with the Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi, when you load Kali, does come with SSH enabled. But what I really want to do is I want to use a stronger key pair called RSA keys. So to do that, I'm going to generate my own set of RSS keys by typing the command SSH -keygen -t space RSA. And I'm going to press enter. And it's going to come up and actually generate some keys. Now, the answers to the questions are going to be all default. I'm simply going to press enter. There's nothing I need to change. I don't need passphrases. And now what that did is it just generated the key pair for me. Then the last thing I want to do to this Raspberry Pi is I want to start SSH automatically. And there's a couple ways we can do this. We can use the service command, but that's kind of old school. There's a newer command that I'm really getting to like a lot better, and it's called Systemctl. When I use Systemctl, oftentimes I will tell the service that I want to start or enable it, which means, so there's two commands. One says start, one says enable. What's the difference? That's really the question. Start says start the service. Enable says next time you boot up, start the service. And I really want to do both. A lot of times I want to start the service to make sure A, it's a valid service and it's actually going to start, and then I want to enable it. Part of the problem I've had, depending on the service I'm going to start, if I start it first and then I go to just say enable, because the service is already started, it might not be able to do the proper job of making the connection. So I'm going to actually do it kind of backwards. I'm going to type in system CTL enable SSH. I'm going to hit enter. And what it does is it creates a system link so it can automatically start that, which is kind of cool. And then I'm going to have to hit the up arrow key, and I'm simply going to say start. Now, if this were unable to enable this service, or the service was not called SSH, it would have just come back with an error that said, hey, that's an unknown service. So this is pretty safe to do. So now I'm going to go ahead and tell it START, and I put an extra space in there, start SSH, and you're going to see it comes back and just with a prompt. That means, yes, the service is indeed started. And if I wanted to, I could also type in service status all, and this will show me all services. Let me try that again. Got to spell system correctly. Status all, and this will tell me and show me all of the services started. Oh, what did I miss there? Oops, I said system. How about service status? I know all you Linux guys are coming unglued and out of your seats, right? And that's okay. You can just come unglued and out of your seats. So it's service, and you should see that SSH indeed is started. And I know that it is because you'll see SSH down about 2/3 of the way down your screen, has a plus sign by it. So I know the service is indeed started correctly, and now every time I boot into this system, this service will automatically start. So that's going to conclude this video. I want to do some wrap up and show you where that batch file is, or where the cut and paste file is on my pentestprime.com. So if you'll just hang out for a second or two, I'll show you where that file's at so you can download it, and you can of course do this video, and you'll have all the cut and paste for the entire video series. So I will see you guys in the next video after a couple of short remarks. As I promised, as I close down this first video, I want to take you to pentestprime.com. So I'm going to open my browser, and mine of course defaults to that automatically since that's my premier website. And underneath download areas, now you're going to see that I have actually several files here with respect to the Raspberry Pi. I have one here, Raspberry Pi, email, IP address, and deploy access point. This will all be included in the video series I'm doing now, and this is a little bit different because things changed since the time the production of this video. So here's another one, a Raspberry Pi 3 reverse TCP shell. I will probably go ahead and put this out. I don't know if this will be on YouTube, but it will be out for my class. But the one that's more important is here is conquering the Pi 3. These are all the notes for this video set of 1 through 4. If I click on that, I of course can go down here and I can click on the file right here, and this will allow me to in fact download the file. And as you can see right here, I'm ready to actually download, or I can just open the file, and here's the file as I've given it to you. Again, these are just the cut and paste notes. These are not the notes for the whole video, but this is all of the text that I'm going to cut and paste into my copy of Putty into probably Nano. So here's all the cut and paste stuff that you might want for videos 1 through 4 on the series Conquering the Pi. So with that, guys, I will see you all in the next video, and welcome to Career Pathways and pentestprime.com.